My uncle left me his old antique shop, which didn't seem very special at first. Nevertheless, the concealed chamber situated behind his office was the catalyst for drastic change. One of the most difficult periods of my life was the day that Uncle Harold passed away. He was more than merely an uncle. He was akin to a parent to me, consistently present during my times of sorrow or hardship. I was ready for the news when his counsel presented me with his will. However, nothing could have prepared me for the following. To my dear niece Clara, I leave my most cherished possession, Harold's curiosities. I was taken aback by the remarks. A cherished possession? The shabby store on Maple Street barely made it, relying on the patronage of a few tourists and locals. The air was stagnant, the wooden flooring groaned, and the windows were grimy. How could Uncle Harold have believed that this location was valuable? Later that day, I stood outside the shop, my eyes filled with tears of frustration and sorrow. What is the reason for his decision to assign me this substantial responsibility? I was already struggling to pay my expenses and juggling 2 jobs, all the while my aspirations were slipping away. My life was already complicated. Rather than receiving a gift, I was presented with this antiquated establishment. However, Uncle Harold was consistently meticulous and deliberate. Maybe there was more to the shop than I realized if he believed it was significant. I opened the groaning door and entered the dim space, causing the small bell above it to tinkle. I took a deep breath. The sunlight that penetrated the filthy windows was accompanied by dust that drifted in the air. Everything from corroded silver candelabra to cracked porcelain figurines was arranged on the shelves. Mismatched pocket timepieces and rusted keys were displayed in a display case located at the counter. A long table, littered with ancient books, broken figurines, and other peculiar items, was situated in the center of the room. I paused to allow the atmosphere to envelope me. Childhood memories resurfaced. I had spent numerous afternoons on the floor with Uncle Harold, listening to his narratives about the treasures that surrounded us. There was a story behind each item, some of which were humorous and others were somber, each of which was imbued with the awe that only he could evoke. I followed my gaze to the rear of the shop, where a narrow hallway led to his office, a location that I was prohibited from entering as a juvenile. When I inquired about it, he would jokingly respond, "Business matters." Curiosity now prevailed. I may discover a note or other item that elucidates the reason he left me the shop if I conduct an investigation. I opened the office door, which groaned open to reveal a small room that was littered with documents on a heavy oak desk. The walls were adorned with faded maps, and an antiquated bookshelf was sagging beneath its contents. I observed an unusual feature on the wall as I searched through the chaos, an indistinct outline in the plaster that was difficult to discern unless one approached it closely. I felt for a fissure or a fastener as I pressed my hand against the wall, and my heart raced. I discovered a small indentation concealed beneath unfastened molding after an apprehensive moment. A delicate nudge caused the wall to shift and swing open with a quiet clack. A concealed chamber, unaffected by the passage of time, was situated within. Light streamed in from a single window, revealing shelving brimming with extraordinary antiquities, and the air was noticeably fresher and colder. These were not mere baubles, but rather treasures. In velvet-lined cases, gold coinage gleamed, gorgeous jewelry shone, and archaic manuscripts were meticulously preserved. Tiny, ornate box with peculiar symbols engraved on it was sitting on a pedestal in the center of the room. I exhaled as I approached and caressed the smooth surface. Uncle Harold evidently derived significance from this. Was this the reason he left me the shop? Did he always intend for me to uncover this concealed information? I became fixated on comprehending the truth in the days that ensued. The antiquities were examined and their histories were attempted to be pieced together during every available moment in the concealed chamber. Uncle Harold's orderly handwriting contained notes that provided a detailed account of the provenance of certain objects, while others remained a mystery. One evening, while seated on the floor, I discovered a journal concealed within a volume that had been carved out. Its pages were adorned with intricate descriptions of the objects in the room, enigmatic notes, and illustrations. As I perused the pages, I came to the realization that this was not merely a compilation. It was a map that directed me to a specific destination. However, Exactly where was it leading? The most recent entries became increasingly urgent, as they referenced a destination and cautioned of potential hazards. One passage in particular caught my attention. Clara must be aware of the truth. She is the solution. My stomach began to convulse. What is the truth? What did he mean by being the key? I initiated my preparations with the intention of adhering to the course that Uncle Harold had established. The more I acquired knowledge, the more inquiries I had. Who else was aware of this concealed chamber? Was Uncle Harold concealing it from someone, or was he safeguarding it? And what would I discover at the conclusion of this journey? I began my journey at an antiquated library in the heart of the city, with the expectation of discovering the answers I was seeking. I searched through ancient volumes and old records, stitching together pieces of information, armed with references from the journal. One name repeatedly surfaced: Elias Montrose, a 19th-century explorer who is purported to have discovered a legendary artifact known as the Heart of Eternity. Legend has it that this organ bestowed immense power, but at an unspeakable expense. Is this the object of Uncle Harold's search? If so, what is the rationale for involving me? As I delved further, I observed peculiar coincidences: people concealed in close proximity, murmurs trailing me through congested areas. I returned to the shop one day to discover that the front door lock had been tampered with, despite the fact that no evidence of missing items was present. I was unable to halt the paranoia that had taken hold. Not when I was so near to uncovering the truth that Uncle Harold had given up everything to safeguard. One night, I returned to the concealed room and removed the ornate box from the pedestal. I found a black metal compass inside, and its needle was rotating erratically despite the fact that it was indoors. I experienced a dizzying sensation as a result of the energy surge that surged through me when I held it. I observed the needle pointing directly at the wall as soon as the sensation dissipated. I was able to uncover an additional concealed compartment within the stone by following its guidance. A crimson ribbon was used to secure a rolled-up parchment. A map marked with locations encompassing multiple countries and eras was disclosed upon unrolling it. 3 words, "Trust your instincts," were written in the unmistakable penmanship of Uncle Harold at the bottom of the map. As I held the map close, tears welled up in my eyes. I comprehended the rationale behind Uncle Harold's selection of me for the first time since I inherited the shop. This mission was not solely about secrets or treasure. It was about demonstrating my ability to continue the legacy he had entrusted to me. I began to prepare for the voyage ahead with a resurgence of determination, memorizing clues from the journal, perusing notes, and packing supplies. However, as the departure date approached, uncertainty began to permeate. What happens if I am unsuccessful? What if the dangers that Uncle Harold warned me about were too much for me to handle? I stood in the concealed chamber on the morning of my departure, observing the artifacts that surrounded me. They were not mere objects. They were components of a legacy, fragments of a puzzle. I silently pledged to Uncle Harold, "I will complete what you have begun." As I took a deep breath, my voice remained stable in spite of my internal turmoil. Whatever it takes. And with that, I entered the unknown, with the compass warming my pocket and the map directing my path. I was unaware that the forthcoming expedition would not only challenge my courage, but also the very essence of my identity. The voyage commenced with a train excursion to the initial location on the map, an abandoned monastery situated in the misty highlands of Scotland. I experienced a disquieting sensation as the scenery outside my window became increasingly hazy, as if someone were observing me. Occasionally, I would detect a movement in the periphery of my eye or hear footfall behind me when no one else was present. Uncle Harold's words reverberated in my mind, "Trust your instincts," despite the caution my instincts implored. A chilly precipitation greeted me as the train finally arrived at the modest station near the monastery. I ascended the winding path to the decaying stone building on the hill, securing my coat tightly. The sole sounds were the rustling of foliage and the distant chirping of birds, and the air was reeking of moist earth and moss, a journey into an unspoiled realm. I had been directed to this location by the map for a reason, regardless of my ignorance regarding the contents of the ancient fortifications. Elias Montrose had concealed something valuable in this location during his travels, as indicated by the journal. This item was associated with the heart of eternity. However, locating it would be a challenging task. The journal suggested that pitfalls and mysteries were in place to safeguard whatever was concealed beneath the monastery. I heard creaks from the corroded hinges as I pushed the heavy wooden door open, and a chill ran down my spine. The air was dense with decay inside, and shadows danced on the walls as light filtered through the stained glass windows. The floor was strewn with detritus, including decaying books, shattered earthenware, and collapsed timbers. However, a sense of history persisted amidst the ruins, as if the stones harbored secrets from a bygone era. My Uncle Harold had left me a compass, which I promptly extracted. Before resolving on a direction that was further into the building, the needle whirled chaotically. I followed its guidance, traversing confined corridors and deteriorating staircases until I arrived at a room that was unlike any other. The intricately carved columns supported the ceiling, which towered high. A small leather-bound volume was held by an altar in the center, which was fractured but still gleamed with vestiges of gold leaf. As I approached, my pulse beat rapidly, and I was partially anticipating a snare. However, nothing transpired. I approached the book with caution, and upon opening it, I discovered pages that were adorned with enigmatic writings and diagrams that resembled constellations. I came to the realization that this was not merely a diary as I was flipping through. It was a guide to decoding the subsequent section of the map. Sudden, low growl reverberated throughout the chamber, causing me to startle. I observed movement in the shadows as I spun around. A figure emerged, concealing its face behind a cowl and wielding a staff crowned with a sparkling crystal. Unsettling reflections were projected on the walls by the unearthly light. "What is your name?" I demanded, clutching the book tightly. The figure remained mute, examining me before finally speaking in a gravelly voice. "You should not have come here." "I am seeking answers," I replied, attempting to maintain my composure in the face of the fear that was enveloping me. "I am in search of the heart of eternity." The figure tensed at the mention of the heart, and silence enveloped us. They suddenly charged forward, swiftly flourishing their staff. I instinctively dived, narrowly evading the situation. I scrambled back, searching for a weapon to defend myself, as adrenaline erupted. However, the ground trembled violently before we could resume our journey. Dust descended from the ceiling, and the walls were infiltrated with fissures. The figure's countenance transitioned from one of aggression to one of dread. They vanished into the shadows without uttering a word. I stood motionless until the tremors ceased, as I was left breathless. Upon the restoration of tranquility, I observed that a portion of the wall had collapsed, unveiling a concealed passageway. I gathered my courage and entered the building, using my flashlight to illuminate the darkness. The enormous subterranean chamber was reached as the conduit spiraled downward into the earth. A pedestal, similar to the one in Uncle Harold's concealed chamber, was situated in the center. However, this pedestal did not contain a box. Rather, it contained an object, a fragment of obsidian that was gently glinting in the dim light. As I reached for it, my mind was inundated with visions of flames and destruction, and murmurs of power corrupting those who sought it. I exhaled and retreated, as my heartbeat increased. This fragment, regardless of its nature, presented a threat that could potentially motivate individuals to commit violence in order to obtain it. However, I was aware that I could not abandon it. I was obligated to complete this undertaking if Uncle Harold had placed his trust in me. Securing the shard in my satchel, I returned to the surface. I was exhausted by the time I emerged into the gray afternoon, but there was no time to recover. The compass was already guiding me to my next destination, a sunken temple located off the coast of Greece. The journey to Athens was characterized by a combination of exhilaration and apprehension. I sensed that the stakes were increasing with each mile. I came to the realization that this was not a straightforward treasure quest after learning more about the fragment and the shrouded figure. Whoever or whatever it was, would not cease. It had evolved into a competition against forces that were beyond my control. Upon arriving in Greece, I enlisted the services of a local fisherman to transport me to the coordinates indicated on the map. The sea was placid, reflecting the Mediterranean sun, but peril was concealed beneath it. The temple's mysteries were lost centuries ago when it was submerged in a significant earthquake. As per the journal, numerous divers had attempted to investigate it over the years. However, none had survived. Are you certain that you wish to proceed with this? As we anchored above the site, the fisherman inquired, his weathered visage betraying his concern. I replied, I am compelled to, as I fasten my diving equipment. I submerged beneath the waters, stepping into a subdued underwater realm characterized by a haunting silence. Schools of fish swam past me, and sunlight drifted down, illuminating the dispersed marble and stone fragments on the ocean floor. The temple's silhouette emerged as I delved deeper, our expansive structure that had been engulfed by coral and vegetation. Even in its state of degradation, the submerged architecture was breathtaking. The corridors were adorned with statues of gods, their visages weathered yet still majestic. I entered a sealed chamber marked by a familiar symbol, the same one that was on the ornate box in Uncle Harold's shop. By following the compass further into the labyrinth, I gradually pried the door open by employing the tools in my harness. Eventually, it opened wide, revealing a chamber overflowing with inconceivable treasures. Golden statuary, ornate crowns, and ceremonial weapons adorned every surface. A pedestal at the center supported a second fragment, identical to the one I had recovered from Scotland. I observed movement in the shadows as I reached for it. I spun around and observed luminous eyes that were observing me from the darkness. The enormous serpent-like creature, its scales gleaming like oil and canines oozing with venom, surged into view before I could react. Using the temple's ruins to my advantage, I dove out of its path, desperate to escape, and panic struck me. The water was shook by each movement of its tail, causing stones to dislodge and enveloping us in sediment clouds. The moment it appeared that there was no escape, a memory from the journal resurfaced in my mind. The relics were being guarded by creatures that could be disturbed by sound. I struck a nearby column with a metal rod that I had extracted from the detritus, resulting in a piercing sound. The serpent trembled. I capitalized on my opportunity and grabbed the second fragment, sprinting for the exit with my lungs bursting with air. I gasped for breath as I burst to the surface, tightly grasping the fragment. The fisherman assisted me in boarding, his gaze betraying his disbelief. What was that? He inquired. I replied, I wish I had known, before collapsing onto the deck. I compared the two fragments side by side once I was back on solid ground. They were collectively a component of a larger entity, which suggested the shape of the heart of eternity. However, as I assembled them, I came to the realization that obtaining the remaining shards might necessitate sacrifices that I was not prepared to make. The words of Uncle Harold reverberated in my mind. She is the key. What did he mean by this? Was my intention to either annihilate or unleash the heart's power? I packed for the journey ahead, with the two fragments in my possession and a plethora of queries circling in my mind. The map directed me eastward toward a distant mountain range in Nepal, where priests preserved ancient knowledge. Nevertheless, I was compelled to prepare with a sense of urgency. I was apprehensive that the closer I drew to the truth, the more I would be compelled to make sacrifices, as someone was pursuing the fragments. The fragments felt heavier than ever when I boarded the plane to Nepal. I was edging closer to the answers, but I was also confronted with perils that I could barely comprehend with each step. Uncle Harold's confidence in me was unwavering. However, my resolve was undermined by uncertainty. What if my physical capabilities were inadequate? What if the heart imposed requirements that I was unable to fulfill? The monks were awaiting, their knowledge concealed beneath veils and prayers. The final elements of the puzzle and potentially the truth behind Uncle Harold's decision to select me are situated beyond them. I came to the realization that this voyage was not solely about discovering the heart as I held the weathered map. It was also about identifying my authentic self. Despite the dread that accompanied my every movement, I was motivated by a single thought. Uncle Harold was confident in my ability to complete this task. I would confront the mountains, regardless of what lay ahead, not for the sake of power or fame, but for the legacy he had bestowed upon me. I stepped into the unknown, prepared to complete the task we had begun together, With the compass firmly in my pocket and the map directing me,